to try that one again. Good evening. This is Gloria Taylor Brown, and this is the 17th and last issue of Stepping Into Ourselves, a gathering of priestesses. And I want to thank you for being present, and I want to apologize. We are having a little sound difficulty. We're aware of it. We know it's there, and there doesn't seem to be anything we can do about it. So we will do our best not to talk over each other unless we get excited, in which case all bets are off. And so we are here in honor of the anthology, Stepping Into Ourselves, an anthology of writings on priestesses. Yes, it's a wonderful book, and it's available at Goddess Inc., goddess-inc.com. And if you put in the words Summer 2014, you'll get a 15% discount on both the PDF and the printed version. And it's a hefty book. It will keep you reading through the year. We had earlier today, we had a redo of the Susan Weed and Ann Key show because we had technical difficulties there. And we went over some of the issues that are in this book. And there's a whole section in there that Kathleen Breen did on incense and herbs and all kinds of wonderful things. So besides all the marvelous writing, and there really is marvelous writing in there. And the other thing that came up, and I couldn't get up and go and get it, was some of you heard Susan Weed talking about Susanna Budapest and tying them together with a red thread as she initiated them into being a witch or being a priestess. And the thing that kept coming up for me was Awakening Osiris by Normandi Ellis, The Knot of Isis. At the ends of the universe is a blood-red cord that ties life to death, man to woman, will to destiny. Let the knot of that red sash, which cradles the hips of the goddess, bind in me the ends of life and dream. And if you haven't read Awakening Osiris, you have missed out on one of the treasures that has been written. So, and we have with us tonight the author of that book, Normandi Ellis. Well, the author and translator of that book, Normandi Ellis. And we also have Nano Boye Nagle, who has done some significant work in gender studies and is also a specialist in EFT, which is quite a few people are finding is very helpful in changing their lives, basically. I know of several people. In fact, I have a friend who is a, well, she's a gynecologist from Haiti who just wrote a book called Voodoo in My Soul. So, but she used EFT and took some people with EFT training down to treat the people after the big earthquake there. So anyway, as I said, the sound is very confusing tonight, so I apologize. So we begin this evening with a question we always begin, and you two are totally well. You can answer in any way you choose. What drew you on the path of becoming a priestess? And Boy, why don't you go first with that one?
That's a complicated question for me. My piece in the book is called "It's Easier to Be a Priest Than a Priestess."
Mm-hmm.
And in a general sense in the universe, that's definitely true. In the present-day world, it's definitely much easier to be a priest than a priestess. Way more recognition, way more validation in the world. But on a personal level, it was, for me, I was an interfaith minister before I even got involved with the Buddhist community. And I have only just really come into acknowledging myself as a priestess and as a guardian, that I can be both, and that butch girls get to be priestesses, because the word priestess kind of in my psyche went with like fairy, you know, like, and it was pink and flowy. I mean, it was flowy stuff, and it had nothing to do with me, you know, like, I am so not in that category. So that's the very short version of how I came to terms with that. Butch girls get to do all sorts of things, and just as this is what a woman of 53 looks like, this is what a priestess looks like too. And that as I realized that as a solo practitioner, I was priestessing, and that when I work with women, I work as a priestess, and when I'm doing a super service, which is my tradition, I work as a minister. And they're very similar, but they're very different. I mean, it's all the same channel, but they use different aspects of myself, and I like to move between all those different aspects.
So, Normandi, I found the source of the echo. It is you. So, so be aware that I will mute you whenever you are not speaking.
Fine.
All right.
You've been talking out of turn.
Well, just start moving your lips, and I'll let you talk. Normandi and I have been friends for 15 years, and we have been to Egypt together, and we have written a book together, and I've spent time with her all over the place, and I adore and love her, but I have never heard her answer this question. So, Miss Normandi Ellis, what drew you on the path of the priestess?
Well, I grew up in a family that had left the Catholic Church. But they had all these cool things, like they had a statue of the Virgin Mary on the mantle, and she was stepping on a serpent, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I like her. How come we don't have one in the Episcopal Church, you know? So I used to go down to the end of the street where we lived, and I would take those butt ends of the wooden planks where my dad had made something, and I'd put them in the crotch of the trees, and I'd take the ball jars, and I'd scoop up the water and put whatever plants I had just picked by the side of the road and put it in there, and then I'd lie down underneath these trees, and I would imagine that I was looking up into the blue sky under the hem of the skirt of that woman that I called God's wife. I didn't know, I just called her God's wife. And so I really didn't think that I needed to go to church because I had my cathedral in the trees. That was always what was important to me. And anyway, I sort of lived that way, getting thrown out of Sunday school classes for asking the wrong questions, you know, and things like that. And, well, I really ended up on the path of the priestesshood when I was given a book by a man who was a neighbor. He happened to have had the yard, his father had the yard where I was lying under the tree canopy. And this fellow was older when, you know, when I met him, not older than me. We had grown up in the same neighborhood. And he had been trained by the Rosicrucians because he was headed to Vietnam, and he was assisting souls in transition over there. And so we talked philosophy for a long time. I was reading Dion Fortune. I guess I was already on the path and didn't know it, you know. So we talked a lot, and he said, you need to read this book. And so I looked at the Egyptian Book of the Dead. He made me buy it right on the spot at the bookstore across the street. And a year later, he died. And I suddenly thought, why have I got this book? What am I supposed to do with this book? And so I found myself in a translation workshop, and I picked a language that I didn't even know, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. you know, because I couldn't decide when I was young if I should write or paint, and there was the perfect language for me, you know. So I just picked it up and taught myself hieroglyphs, and I fell in love with the culture, the language. You know, Isis was always my girl. I saw statues of Isis with her foot on top of that snake, and I said, well, nice to meet you. You know? So from then on, I used to tell people, you know, that I was an Episcopalian. And, you know, I would go by real fast and they would just, I'm an Episcopalian. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've been over this before, and I love the story of how magical that whole experience was for you, because it truly was transformative in a way that you had no idea that it would be transformative. And yet, you know, as we, and you know, in the same way, Boye says, you know, I didn't think I was a priestess because that was them fairy girls. You know, I never liked the term priestess because it was too gender specific for me. You know, I didn't want to be categorized, because I find if you tend to have a lot of sekhmet in you, you don't want other people telling you who you are. So
for me, it was also that when I first came out in my 20s, and I was like, you know, I shaved my head and I had a leather jacket, and I was a bit like, I just came right out. Like, there was no arguing about who I was. And there were goddess women around in London at the time, and they had a lot of rules about what you could and couldn't do.
Yes.
And most of them didn't approve of me. And as I grew up, you know, over the last 30 years, there were a lot of women would do things what I used to call like non-consensual smudging. You go somewhere and you get non-consensually smudged, you know. I'd be like, I didn't ask for this, you know. And a lot of them were the ones who like didn't like that I called myself Boy with an E, which is, you know, a call to the divine feminine. And they just made assumptions about who I was, worse than people in the rest of the world who didn't bother with who I was. And so I really had to go through this whole process of various different goddess incarnation traditions that I got bumped into. And it was Linny from RCGI who invited me to come and drum at their gatherings and teach drumming. And I was all like, oh, I don't know, I've been there a lot. How many times do I need to go there and get burned? She said, no, it'll be great. And they just totally respected all my interfaith stuff. And it's like, whatever face of the goddess you have, that works here. And that totally shifted it around for me, that I had permission to be gender fluid and still be a woman and all of that stuff, you know, and to sometimes use beloved and not any gender, because I agree with you. I sometimes have a trouble with a deity with plumbing. I mean, I like goddesses for specific things. For me, they're like the names of the divine in the Quran. You know, each one has an aspect that we need to manifest in that particular moment, or that we're lacking, and so I call on that. But most of the time, I don't think of something that is, like I said, got plumbing.
Yeah. I was raised with a teacher who basically said, God doesn't care what you call her. And so I use the term God. But, you know, if you're in the Egyptian spirituality, if you cut off the male half, you have cut off half of the wisdom that is there. I mean, you would lose Ptah and Thoth and Osiris and Anubis and all of those that are so strong in the Egyptian tradition, you know, and who are not suppressor male characters. And I'm going to unmute Normandi so she can speak on that, because you know, that is part and parcel of who I am and who I think respect other people to become, is that I don't care who you worship, as long as you worship. You know, that's part of you. Normandi, what do you have to say on that?
Well, I think that's right, Gloria. I really don't pay that much attention to, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Isis is always the one that I deal with because she embodies that, and I liked what Boye said about the netter, the nature, one calls on the nature of the divine being, which was the ancient Egyptian word, nature. That was the word for the god or the goddess. It was nature, Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is filled with God, and there's a book about God. And that was a Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, but he had it right, And so I don't think that in a priestess community you only need to call on goddesses. I think that the energy of the divine being that you're calling on is what you're trying to aspect. And they had creator deities who were male and female, and it just depended on how you wanted that creation to happen. Neith drew them out of her essence, out of the net of her body, Canoe made them on the wheel. So, they each had a different way. Thoth was mathematical and stirred them up. First it was 1, then it was 2, then it was 4, then it was 8. So it's really about the way of the making, not necessarily whether they're male or female. Although I have to say that I do like the whole idea of the beloved and the when the god and the goddess come together in whatever form, that's like a pretty sweet celebration because that's where the human and the divine come together, and that is what the Helios Gamos is, seeing that in each other.
There's a Sufi saying which is Ishkala Mabudala, which is God is love, lover, and beloved, all at the same time. And I also heard this Sufi teacher say, which I love, which is why it worked for me, because I'm not very good at joining things, was that first you design your God and then you build a relationship with her. And that's always been my experience. I've often encouraged clients to, if they're having trouble with their spirituality of whatever kind, to do a job description for an ad for a goddess that they wanted. And then, write it out. What characteristics would your goddess have that doesn't resemble your mother or your grandmother? The things you do want in somebody, and then perhaps either a creator yourself or look for those characteristics, and maybe you'll find a goddess that you didn't even think of.
And I think that there also is many different aspects of the goddess that, whether it's goddess or god, you can't necessarily say that's male or female. I mean, if you're dealing with Kali and Durga and Ganesha, and you have a lot of different aspects there. That Ganesha is very caring and supportive and gentle. Kali isn't.
Ganesha is very queer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, there's a number of aspects there. So, Normandi, for someone who is exploring the beginnings of the path, I mean, in a way, you two represent two very deep, the Sufi, the interfaith, and the Egyptian and the traditions coming through to the Christian religion as it is today. But so, for someone who is beginning, and I'm going to go back to some of the stuff I said at the beginning of this show, for somebody who's just beginning on this path, they have wandered onto this show, and they're going, oh my God, what are these women talking about? What advice do you give to someone who's just beginning to walk the path?
Well, I ask them, what are you in love with? I mean, I think that's the place that's going to get you there the quickest. What are you in love with? And if let's say if the natural world is something that calls to you, that you just can't get enough of it, and that you find yourself out in your cathedral of the trees, you know, that's where you start. Wherever it is that you find your passion, that's where you start. You know, and one of the things that brought me to this whole thing is that I also had a passion for poetry. I loved poetry. I loved to write. And so the language of learning to speak a desire was very important to me. I mean, even when I was getting thrown out of Sunday school classes in church, I still loved some of the poetry that I was hearing in some of those places. And I would find myself recrafting it so that, you know, as Boye said, it would fit what I needed to hear. So that the words that were being spoken to the divine were words that I felt, yeah, I can embody that, and I can speak that. You know, and I would say whatever your passion is, you know, that's where you start. You know, it doesn't have to be a culture. It can be, you know, another person. It can be a place where you are. It can be part of the natural world. Most often, to most people, I find it's part of the natural world.
Mm-hmm. And Boye, how would you answer that question? And I particularly want you to answer that question for young girls who are maybe having some gender dysmorphia, who, you know, don't quite know how to identify themselves at this point in time, because there are a number of them, and a lot of them are not getting very much advice beyond, you know, go to counseling.
Right. I think that the place to start for me is the same as, like, where do you find that thing that gives you a sense of peace, a sense of awe? And like, for various reasons in my life, I didn't experience a lot of awe growing up, and some of it's neurological. I have a brain injury, I have ADD, I have a whole lot of other things. I had an injury when I was a kid, and I did to poetry because I couldn't learn things without rhythm. So I made everything poetry. I made everything music. So, like, I remembered everything with rhythm, and I would hear music in the electronic stuff, and I'd write poems all the time. And that was how I made sense of the world. To this, because the world very often didn't make sense to me. And I think that when you are different in whatever way, whether it's gifted or you're genderqueer, or you're just a straight girl who doesn't want to act like other straight girls, you know, like you're a heterosexual girl who's kind of queer in her idea of the world. You're taking one as a sexuality and one as a culture, which most goddess women are pretty queer, because otherwise they'd be doing traditional stuff. I think that finding other I look at it tribally. That's where I would start. Is I look at it tribally. Where are you going to find other tribe members? Where you feel there's a Sufi saying that says our hearts are mirrors that reflect the divine, in which we see the face of the beloved. So I need to find places where I can find myself reflected in somebody else's life or somebody else's story, whether it's a poetry, or whether it's a chat room, or whether it's a support group. I mean, the good thing that computers has done for weird kids is provide places where they can meet online, and they're not the only one in the world when you're in a small little village somewhere, or some small city somewhere. And there's also a lot more people like me who are doing ministry now in a really generic beloved way, as opposed to a strict follow the rules way. And one of the reasons when I had my insight to becoming a minister, it was one of those moments where I went to the bathroom, heard somebody speak, went to the bathroom, saw myself, got goosebumps. I'm sitting on the loo going, shit, because the last thing I wanted was to become a minister. I mean, that was so far from any truth that I had ever had about myself. But one of the reasons what made it okay for me is that I wanted to be a minister for kids who looked like me, because there weren't any ministers who looked like me. and that that they say create the world you want your grandchildren to live in. I wanted my grandchildren, which are all the little butch girls growing up now, all the little baby 4-year-olds and sissy boys, who don't have anyone else to role model for them. They're my grandkids. So what world do I want to create for them? And doing it, look at, that's that question. Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
That's fine. Tangents are encouraged.
Yeah, no straight lines here, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Normandy, I'm going to let you come in because I could see on your face that you had something you wanted to say there.
Well, it's interesting to me because I didn't exactly mean to join a group of goddess people. You know, I mean, for me, I kind of resonate with what you're saying, Boy, because I was that girl who was out in the corner going, oh God, I don't look like everybody else, and I'm just, you know, I'm a straight girl, but I'm not like those straight girls. You know, that's what they're interested in, and I'm not interested in. And so I found myself going off on these tangents by myself because, you know, I enjoy my own thoughts. You know? So I would just, you know, like do all this weird stuff inside my head and work it out and taught myself how to read hieroglyphs, and I don't think anybody else is reading hieroglyphs. I'm going to read hieroglyphs. It's kind of fun. So I like, you know, and then all of a sudden I found people were following me. You know, like they were interested in what I was doing, and I thought, oh, you know, it was a little unnerving. It was really weird. I had Jean Houston call me out. You know, I mean, I went to hear her at a workshop because somebody told me she was reading my book on tape, and I thought, really? I wonder why she's doing that. Doesn't she have her own books? I went to hear her voice, you know, and somebody introduced me to her, and Jean just like threw her arms around me and said, oh, lady, and just hugged me, and it was like she lifted up a rock, and I was under the rock, and I thought, oh, now I have to do something completely different, you know. I can't just do this by myself anymore. And so it was a really interesting moment when I went to Isis Oasis. And Lorianne was there, and Laura Jane's daughter, Goddess rest her souls, I love them. And Lady Olivia, Goddess rest her soul too, she was there. And I was made a priestess of Isis. And when I looked at Lady Olivia and I said, you know, I haven't like taken the test, and I haven't done this, and I haven't done. And she looked at me and went, what are you talking about? You know, you've done it. You don't need somebody's stamp of approval. So just bend your head down here and let me put this crown on. You know? It was like, oh. So really then I realized that there were things that I needed to do for a community of people. And I had never done that before. I was just doing it for myself. And now, no, I'm doing it for other people. And I had this dream that Lady Olivia came to me. On the night of her death, she came to me in a dream. And she said, so, what are you going to do for the Fellowship of Isis now? And I said, Lady Olivia, whatever you want, I'll just do it. And she said to me, I want you to build a goddess temple in your backyard. I was like, oh, okay. So guess what I'm doing? And I guess people are going to come to it.
I'll go. I followed you halfway around the world. I might as well follow you to your goddess temple.
That'd be great. That would be so good.
You know, it is kind of like that. It's where are you going to build your temple? And how are you going to build it? Because whether it's for weird and unusual children, I've always been weird. I love the word weird, based upon, you know, the old traditions of weird. And I have a grandmother that told me early on that being weird was not bad. Being weird was just being different. And of course, this is the same grandmother who taught me how to read palms and tarot cards. So obviously, there's a lot of weird going back in my family. But I never was able to relate to the girls who were, particularly when I was in high school. It was a matter of they were alien beings that did alien things that I had no idea what they were talking about. And what I related to was books. I read 3,500 books whenever I was in high school. I know that because the librarian kept count and gave me an award at the end. And but the other thing was that I didn't relate to the male culture, which the male culture was in Oklahoma, was founded around football. And I don't mean soccer. And I didn't relate to them either. It's like I was an alien being on this planet, and I had no one else to turn to. And what I had was I had a history professor who was a Rosicrucian, who saw in me some of her own findings as she had gone along, and she opened up her library to me, and I was able to read her books, which were all the books from the turn of the last century before, and a lot of incredible books that no one had ever heard of. And my mother had no idea what I was doing and couldn't figure out why I was interested. But I think that there's, whether it's a sexual issue or whether it's just not fitting in, I think there's a lot of us out there that didn't fit in, and now we're looking at that being okay. But it's taken a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, Boye, about how, as an interfaith minister, as a minister for this, and as dealing with ADD and brain trauma, you're basically dealing with all the issues I'm talking about. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about that, how, because we do have a lot of people that aren't fitting in, and they still don't fit in.
I think that's one of the things that the goddess communities that I'm encountering now, which were not the ones I encountered 30 years ago, let me say that. People have evolved, thank goodness, are better at accepting, looking for unity without uniformity. Hazrat Inayat Khan has a book called the Unity of World Religions. And it's about his vision. He's the Sufi teacher at the lineage that I am initiated in and ordained in. And in there he talks about how one of the problems with religion is that people of like mind or like vibration or like weirdness feel called together in a sense of unity, looking for like-minded people. Whether we're joiners or not joiners, we're still looking for people to mirror us, somewhere where we can have some mirror neurons going on in the world, And that the problem happens is that once you meet a few other people, it starts becoming a compulsion for uniformity. And then it starts like, this is the only way to do it. Or you're not doing it right, you're in our group, but you're not doing it right, or you can only be in our group if you do this. And one thing that queers do really well is that they accept pretty much everybody. I mean, they accept everybody within some sort of moral code. And that some of the goddess women that I'm involved with now do the same thing. And I really, really appreciate it. And because I was not a joiner, I was not somebody who went on a spiritual path. I meet a lot of people in my Sufi community and the goddess community who went through, like, really were called to have some spiritual calling. Like they went to gurus, they went to this, and I so did not do any of that. Smart people were not religious. Smart people did not do spirituality. I was very English. We just did not, having grown up in England, that was just the way we did it. And in fact, when I got sober and I got spiritual, my mom thought I'd join the Moonies. And she just thought I'd, like totally, no frame of reference for any of that in my life. And so I think that one of the things we can really do for each other is to appreciate each other. I understand the literal meaning of the word tolerance, but I hate the word tolerance. I mean, have you ever been tolerated somewhere?
Yeah.
I've tolerated places a lot. I have been in the past. And it doesn't feel good to be tolerated, you know? And so I really like the idea of us appreciating each other, not tolerating each other. And the only hard thing about that, though, is that I have to do it to you if I think you're an asshole. And that takes a little bit more practice on my part, because I like to be right. But I guess that's just a call to practice. So. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does answer my question. And Normandi, I know that you're now in a community where you're part of a community that's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
So how is that working for you?
Well, I actually joined this community. I bought a house here in Indiana at a spiritualist community. So I live among a bunch of people who are kind of behind a gate. It's not like your typical gated community. It's like, 138 years of people living on the grounds and talking to dead people. And so other people think we're very strange out there. My family thinks I've joined the Moonies. It's pretty unusual for them. But and the other thing is I had to get used to having people in such close proximity to me, because many of the folks here are from a very Christian background.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from a goddess and a pagan background, a metaphysical background more than anything else. But what draws us together, interestingly enough, we have a trail of religions. And there's Christ, there's Osiris, there's Buddha, there's Muhammad, there's Abraham. We have, I can't remember his name. Boy, you tell me. The guy who founded Jainism. Do you remember his name?
Oh, no, I don't. But I know who it is.
It's a big, long name. I can't even pronounce it yet. Yes. And, of course, Lao Tzu. And so there's like this whole trail of religions where we live. And I go down and I'll talk to the boys every morning, how you doing, Osiris? I'll kiss his little cheek, I'll play his Isis. And I'm looking around going, okay, where's Kuan Yin? And where's Isis? And, so it's like, I figured that's why I'm here. I'm building the rest of that community so that we're balanced out on either side. And, a lot of people here don't understand my metaphysical background. Even among the spiritualists, but that's okay, because I'm here. I'm in this community, in the kitchen, and I'm cooking for them, and I'm doing what I need to do, because that's what people do when they're in a community that loves each other. And so, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, I wanted to mention about that term, tolerance. If anyone who's ever taken coaching, particularly from some of the coaching academies here, come out of a tradition where you tolerate nothing. Because tolerating is putting up with. It's putting up with the window that doesn't open. It's putting up with the gate that squeaks. And one of the first things you have to do as you move into coaching is to look at what you're tolerating, what you're allowing to be in your life that you don't accept, you don't appreciate, but you tolerate it. And so I totally get your comment about toleration. And I'm sure there's many people who have tolerated me, and probably a few that haven't. That's why I am who I am, after all. You either like me or you hate me. There's nobody that's in between. And as someone was saying this last weekend, what you just have to make sure of is that the people undecided don't get with people who hate you. So Anyway, but you know, as we move into this space of looking at how we can not tolerate but accept. I mean, Susan Weed was talking about she had a gender undefined person who was taking classes with her. And she said, well, I can't have you here as a woman or as whatever unless you shave your beard. And she says, I know bearded women. I have no problem with that, but it was that beard. And apparently it was a man who was wanting to study with her. And so, you know, for her, it was simply remove the beard and then you can be here and you can say whoever you are. And of course, Susan can get away with that. So she, you know, you follow her rules if you're at her place. And I think in a way we all have that. You know, if you're at my place, you follow my rules. You know, if you have a real clean freak attitude, fine, go clean. You know, my house is available for anybody who wants to come in clean. Thank you, Raven.
I was involved one time in an ordination of a Sufi minister in my lineage, and I was not doing it. I'm not anywhere. You know, Sufism has practices, and you get to be initiated at different levels. And I'm just a common garden, you know, shake your hand, how you doing, type initiate. And but I am ordained, so I got to be part of the service. And I read in the Universal Worship Service, we read from different world religions, and we light a candle from each religion. And the readings are on the same topic from each of the traditions. And I was reading from the Quran, and I read my favorite piece from the Quran, and it was one of those moments where I don't know who or what I was aspecting, but it was really powerful. It was just like, whoa! I was bright red afterwards, and I just felt it like my heart chakra opened up. It was wonderful. And in that moment, I was the last reader, and then they did the actual ordination. And I had this incredible sense of how close we are, those of us that do ministry or priestessing, are to serial killers. You know, how it takes a certain type of narcissism to think that we can even have a connection to the divine that that we make up, that is worth sharing with anybody else, because it's all made up anyway, I think. And that, you know, there's a narcissism that there's a really fine line between thinking that we know it and knowing it. You see what I mean? And that's why a lot of spiritual teachers do a lot of things that harm other people, because they're that really fine line between thinking that we have the power to control other people's lives and using it in a way that is non-respectful, and at the same time owning our own power and not denying that, and walking with grace in that. So I actually wrote a poem about it, about how all ministers are actually could potentially be serial killers. That's it.
Maybe that's why we have so many ministers that get caught with their pants down.
Right, and priestesses too. It's not. I mean, there's plenty of women who've had not so pleasant experiences with priestesses in the community.
Yeah, and so Normandi, with you, I know that you have chosen this path, the spiritualist path, and with a very conscious seeking over the last few years. And it wasn't necessarily where you were headed 15 years ago.
Right.
And so what was it you found there that was so strong that you were willing to move there and cook for them?
Wow. I think part of it is that it's kind of like when Boye was talking about reading that piece and just having this flush of spirit just like running right inside you, that it was so undeniable, that feeling of like, oh my, that's what I've been connecting with, you know, and that connection to spirit, that really strong connection to spirit, I hadn't allowed that in. I mean, I had experienced it, but I had pushed it away. And now it was time for me to embrace it, you know. And, oh, God, being a medium and a spiritualist, I have to say I enjoy trancing. I just really do. I like to hear what they're going to say when I get out of the way, because it just surprises the heck out of me most of the time, you know. I never know what they're going to say. And that's scary, yes, because that's a certain kind of power. What if somebody, like, thought I was doing something weird, you know, or did I do anything weird while I was gone? You know, I mean, there's that line that you're always at that line, and so it is always with integrity that you have to say, you know, this or something better. You're asking, you know, I want my will aligned with the divine will, and that's what I'm here for. And, you know, I may want to create this reality here, but if that's not what I need to be creating, this or something better, you know, I'm willing to be schooled by God and the goddess. I'm willing to be schooled, because otherwise, what am I doing here?
Lovely. And
You know, can I respond to that?
yes, definitely.
I'm fascinated by how many things we have in common, even though you wouldn't guess it by reading our bios, right? Funny how that works out. You know, when I do EFT, I think I definitely the reason I'm so good at it with people is that I am absolutely willing to get out of the way and be open to what I receive intuitively as an empath, to what they need next. And, you know, I'm reading them, I'm looking at their color and doing all that stuff, but I'm also receiving. And I always tell people that this is not therapy. First of all, because it's not therapy and I'm not a licensed therapist, but also it's way more like seeing a psychic than it is seeing a therapist. That I'm going to say stuff, and you need to know that I don't believe it, in the sense of I'm not invested in it being true. You're the dreamer. You get to decide whether this is true in your dream. And if you could reach this stuff without me, you wouldn't need me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I'm working with people. I don't always remember everything that I say, but I do know that what needs to land will, and it's not about. I need to make it not be about that I'm brilliant or I just knew that. It's not about that. You know, it's about that I just received that, and I'm willing to take the risk to share it, and give you a version of what I received with my story attached, because it's always going to have my story attached. You know, because I'm interpreting it through everything I've known. You know, being that I'm not trancing, but I'm receiving. You know, so it's fascinating. I mean, you wouldn't have known that we had all that in common.
I think you may be doing a little trancing, even though you don't know it. When I read tarot cards, it's really dangerous for somebody to come back and ask me something that I said when I was reading tarot cards for them, because I haven't got a clue. I mean, I've had people come back and say, you said the most impactful things. What was it you said after blah, blah, blah? And I'm going, I have no idea, and I don't remember who the hell you are. So you're a very nice person, but, you know, that was, you know, years. In fact, I had one woman come and say, the thing you told me 22 years ago was so impactful, it changed my life. And I'm like, I have no idea who you are. And if I said something impactful, thank the goddess and let's move on. But still, you don't know. You just don't know. It's just getting out of the way and letting them use you. And, you know, I think in many ways that's what Normandi has done. And, you know, I've got this book, and we have this book, Feast of Light. We have her other books, even her poetry books. Her poetry books, by the way, are killer. Do not read them if you have mascara on. And yeah, definitely do not. Particularly the one you're going to get for free. So, Normandi, I'd like you to respond to Boye, and I'd also like you to respond, you know, the idea that you're bringing through wisdom and you're bringing through knowledge, but it's not you bringing it through.
Yeah, it's not you. It isn't you. And it's refreshingly not you. That's the most important thing. because if you're invested in it, you know, and you have your own attachment to it, it's not going to be the pure spirit touching another spirit, and that's what you want. And I think, for me, that's what happens when I write poetry. I'm not writing it for somebody else. I'm not sending it to somebody else. It's just me and my deity, and we're in love, and we're just writing, and I'm just, you know, and that's all it is. And for me, I never expected ever to have anything that I wrote published. I never thought it would happen. I just knew that if I lived my life any other way, it was not going to work. I just had to do it because I had to do it. You know? And so, in a way, writing poetry is like channeling, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I have to say, the last book that I wrote, I would wake up in the morning and I would be crying. I would just be, you know, and I would hear the words. I would hear the last line being spoken to me, and I would like hurry to try to write it down because it was just like, I gotta get it. I gotta get it. You know?
Yeah.
So,
I always say, I had this theory that all the poetry that's ever been written has already been written. Like it already exists in the universe. And that our job as poets is to be fishermen, you know, like our job is to sit still long enough to catch it as it flies around. And I did 4 years ago, I did a poem a day for a year as one of my spiritual practices. So every day I wrote a poem. And some of them were a couple of lines, and some of them were haiku. I got real good at haiku some days because I did not have enough energy to write every day, I thought, you know, but I did the practice. And this year I didn't write it with the intent of it being a book. So right now it's being edited as a book through the Wheel of the Year. So I've written, so there's one for every day of the year, and somebody's editing it for me. And that came to me in a meditation, like, do this, put them together as something so that there's a poem for every day of the year, not necessarily by date. So I have over 360 poems just from that year. And, yeah, it's really fun. Yeah, it's great. I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm cheating. I'm putting some old ones in there. Yeah, but it's in process right now.
Oh, that's good. I can't wait. I can't wait to see it.
Great. I would love it.
Normandi is the most brilliant poetry teacher I've ever experienced in my life. I watched her sit in a class, and we had a woman there who had no intention of writing poetry. She only came because of Egypt and because she loved Normandi. And she wrote poems that had everyone in the room crying.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, you know, it was Rose, and she was just like, I am not writing poetry. I don't do poetry. I don't like poetry. And she's writing poems that were literally ripped out of her insides. They were so great. And
yeah, I like to think it's not me, you know. I mean, I think it's like moving through me, and I just, you know, let someone else, you know, experience it, because it's fun, isn't it? It's fun. And you want them to have as much fun as you're having doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you taught.
When I was at graduate school, we didn't have a poetry class in the master's program, but they had one in the DMIM program. And I thought, and I said, can I at least audit the DMIM poetry program? And so I got to go on this mystical poetry class, which I loved, and it ended up being my thesis. Because we all wrote in the class. People came thinking they were going to be reading, and she had us read a Rumi or a Rilke or whoever, and then we'd have to write overnight a poem inspired by what we'd read or our lives. And so I ended up with this anthology that was my master's thesis, and I called it Mystical Poets Don't Have to Be Dead Poets. It was fun.
Yeah.
That's good.
Normandi, I want to let you speak here, and I'm having to mute you back and forth, and I don't like to do that. So.
Oh no, that's fine.
No, it's not. But I know that poetry and writing for you is so central to you, who you are. In fact, we once had an argument about whether she was an author or a writer. And she didn't want the word author. She only wanted the word writer, because authors were people who cared about the publishing of their books, I believe was the thesis
right. And
of
I just write it, whatever comes out. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So with both of you, I mean, you're holding out a opportunity for people to see that writing poetry is not necessarily about going to school for 6 years and learning how to write and taking English classes and all that. And the idea of poetry is, I have a friend who did a photograph a year. That was her meditation and her modality. And they're quite marvelous. Sometimes they're a garbage can, and sometimes they're in a magnificent sunset, but they're all one per year, I mean one per day, and it was the thing that she saw that day that was her vision, and just had the ability to capture something that was really transcendental, actually. And the poetry, I'm sure, is fabulous as well. So, yeah, one of the things that you are going to receive is a poem that Boye wrote, and also a book of his that he wrote, she wrote. Sorry.
Whatever's fine.
Yeah, about the queer spirituality, which will help you understand a little bit more about with a book of poetry she wrote for her father called Do You Remember That I Love You? Is that correct? You remember, which he was passing away and had Alzheimer's. So, I was laying that one up this morning and crying. Oh, I bought one of Normandi's books the first time that I met her, and rode the train home, and I was reading the book, and tears were just pouring down my face, and the conductor came over to me, and I suppose he thought I'd lost a lover or a child or something. So, can I help you? Can I said, no, this is just so beautiful. And I had to read, I read him one aloud, and he's kind of looking at me like, okay, you're a very strange lady. And so anyway, so we are coming to the end of the time, and this in particular is sorrow, because this is the last one in this particular round, and I want to thank you all for being here, and please tell me what's going on in your life, where you're going from here now, and you know what's the next aspect that you're looking forward to in your priestess path. Boye, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to finishing this anthology. I want to publish it as an ebook so that I can read them. Because I think I was back way long ago in another lifetime when I first came out, like when I was in my 21. I used to do what I call stand-up poetry, because they didn't have spoken word poetry then. I just used to do it in pubs. I was like a stand-up comic, so I did that, and I love doing spoken word poetry. It's one of the it's like a time when I'm not there, you know, like to do a performance properly is just like it's this channeling. I just love it, like we were talking about earlier. So I would love to be able to publish it with the option of people hearing it, because when you hear it in the voice of the poet, it's a totally different experience than just reading it from a page. So that's kind of my focus right now. And then going back, and I'm writing also for a thing here called Bedpost Confessions. It's an Austin thing where writers get to write confessional stories, and during the performance, they read them, and during the performance, the audience gets to fill out a card that says, I confess that, and then the MCs read it. And it's everything like, I confess I've never been to anything like this before, to some strange things where everyone goes, great, that must be interesting. You know, like, talk about acceptance of everybody else's weirdness. Because perversion is, you know, my definition of perversion is something you haven't thought of or done yet, you know. So those are the two big things, is like really focusing on my writing, and then being of service where anyone wants me. If somebody wants me to come and do drum guardian teaching with WTI, I do that, or if people need ministry in any way, and I will go anywhere that people want me to do it.
Oh, great.
For anyone who wants it.
You know our friend Imani White, I think, probably. You know Imani? Yeah. We've had her up drumming for a number of events up in Eugene. So,
right.
Normandi, what's next for you, my love?
Yeah. Well, starting Monday, I'm teaching a course in practical metaphysical classes. Then I'm teaching in the fall candle burning rituals and sacred calendar. So that's all here at Camp Chesterfield. And then in between that, Nikki and I are completing work on a book that we've been really working on since we met you, Gloria, on Egyptian mysteries. And so that's coming along very well. We do it over Skype. We work about 3 hours a day. And she types while I talk, and I type while she talks. It's kind of an interesting collaboration. And then I'll be out in Seattle briefly, but in Eugene most of September. And we'll be doing Egyptian Mystery School for the, I don't know, 15th time maybe while we're in Eugene. And then in November, I go to Egypt. So big months coming up. It's, you know, just, it's all the, you know. So that's what I've got coming up. But Monday, practical metaphysics. And actually, I had a lot of fun writing about metaphysical ethics. Or did that bring up a lot of stuff?
Oh, right.
That's a whole nother show.
Yeah. I'm in that conversation.
Yeah, okay.
You got it.
That one's a whole other show. Sonia Eisenhart just says, oh my God, I know where Camp Chesterfield is. It's not far from me. I think you have somebody coming to visit.
Yay!
So, you know, one of the things we've had is we've had such acceptance from people who have, from all over the world. I mean, we've got people from Southwest Australia to somewhere in Chile. I still haven't found where she is in Chile. To a woman in Sao Paulo, to people in Switzerland, to people in Europe and in other parts of Europe, and all over the U.S. and Canada. And we have really explored a number of options in this program. We have explored how you can be a priestess in your own home, how you can be a priestess stepping out into the world, how you can be a priestess as a poet, how you can be a priestess as not a poet and not a writer. how you can say, I'm not a priestess. That's not what I am. What I am is an observer of priestesses, that I hold the space for them to be there. And I am the one who is willing to accept that. And so we have really, you know, in 17 shows, we've barely touched the surface. That's what I want you to know. Believe me, there is beyond this, as we just talked about metaphysical ethics. That one I could do a whole series on, because that one, I mean, Raven and I have spent hours on the phone discussing that particular issue, and it's all of those things. And what I want you to know is this will continue. We're going to continue in a little different way. We're going to be doing once-a-week shows beginning 2 weeks from now. I'm taking a week off. And we will be beginning, hopefully, with Tamas Renteria, who is one of the authors in the book, who's just moving, and literally just moving this weekend from Tucson to somewhere in California. She obviously wanted to go to the desert. But we're delighted that you could all be here, and Boy and Normandi and everybody else, you are so incredibly fabulous. And the thing I love is that I had no idea who some of these people were, and I paired them based upon not the bios, but upon the dates they were available, first and foremost, but upon my feeling about the resonance of the person. And I know that it has been incredible. And, you know, the interesting thing is I put two best friends on, and I didn't even know they were friends. And I've put other people on who've never met each other, although they should have. You know, they're in the same business. They're in the same genre. So it has been an incredible show and an incredible program, and I hope to continue to bring you these fabulous, incredible people. And it is exceptional, the depth that we can go to. And we will be bringing you additional programs. We'll also be bringing you some classes beginning in the fall, one of which is Normandi's. We're planning on this. Let's see if we can get Normandi to sit down and do it. I love Normandi. But anyway, to get her to do a year-long series for Feast of Light. And I'd love to do a series with you, Boy, for, you know, the whole idea of gender and the transitions, because there's so much need for that right now. And
sure, lovely.
Yeah.
I'm teaching those classes here too, actually.
Yeah, I know you are. So, but this one we can reach everywhere, you know, and we can.
Girls will be boys except when they're not.
Right.
Girls will be girls except when they're not.
Yes, and you know, I don't want anybody to be locked into a body. You know, we're so much more. I mean, I won't even go into that because I got a whole issue around that. But Normandi. I'm going to give you a last word.
Well, first of all, I want to say what a pleasure it was to see you again, Gloria, but to meet you, Boy, it was great. It was just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I hope we get to meet again sometime. Yeah.
Yes.
And I also want to thank Anne and Candace for this incredible book that they have put together. All the voices that they put together was amazing. And you're working at Gloria, wonderful too. I don't know that you could interview yourself, but your contribution is major. So thank you. Thank you too.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. And what I want you to know is that Anne has gifted us with Desert Priestess, which is one of her memoir, and you'll have an email that has that information in there. And when you go there, if you've already bought the Stepping Into Ourselves anthology, there's another book you can buy, which is called Heart of the Sun. And it is also one of those where if you don't like reading, we have it in CDs. So go get your free book and buy another one, because you know, Small publishers need all the support they can get. Trust me on that one. And I love you all, and I thank you, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.